Per the Wrestling Observer, Matt Riddle is said to be close to signing a new deal with WWE. His contract is up in August. The new deal is said to be for 3 years at $400,000 per year guaranteed, plus $50,000 for every show he works in Saudi Arabia. And it is said that Vince McMahon doesn't get it. He doesn't get the whole bro gimmick. But he finds all of his segments hilarious. I guess Matt Riddle amuses him. They love making all those weed jokes on TV. I'm surprised they didn't offer him 20 grand more on that contract. I noticed, by the way, on Monday night, when he was in the back with Jeff Hardy and... was it Jeff Hardy and New Day? He might have been back there with, I think, all of them, but he was wearing that ring jacket. And I noticed on the ring jacket it says M. Riddle. Since he has no first name anymore, I'm going to assume that stands for mid-card, unless somebody else has a better explanation for it. But he was in several segments on Raw Monday night, so you know what? I'm sure Vince really does find him amusing. He wouldn't be on TV that often if he didn't. He probably does want him on TV as much as possible. That's $400,000 a year as his downside guarantee, I assume. Not a bad spot for him to be in. The risk, of course, is that he ends up being used for nothing more than just comedy. Having puppets autographing fucking carrots, like he was doing in the back with a Ramblin' Rabbit on Monday night. Walking around with boxes of donuts. Matt Riddle may not be a serious guy, but they can make serious money with him. I still believe that. I said that when he was still in NXT, and I still believe it today. But there's also another little cloud hanging over him that has to be acknowledged, which is the lawsuit. Which is the lawsuit that was brought against him, which has still not yet been resolved. It is still out there. It is still pending. It is still hanging over his head. And so the question is, would an AEW, for example, would an AEW be knocking down this guy's door if they knew his contract was coming up and he wanted to play, one side against the other, which, could be, you got to be careful because sometimes it could blow up in your face. Guys like Randy Orton and AJ Styles, they acknowledge that they used AEW to get themselves a better deal with WWE. And if you would have asked me this question a year ago, I would have said, are you out of your mind? Of course, AEW would have an interest. They'd be crazy not to. Now, you know what? I'm not so sure. I really am not. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there's a lot of stories out there about Tessa Blanchard, and AEW and WWE have not touched her yet. Doesn't mean they won't. I still expect her to land somewhere in the not too distant future. I think one of them will cave, one of them will want to bring her in, but so far has been radio silence, and she's a talent, and yet she's been out there and there's been no movement. So, would they be interested in a guy like Matt Riddle as long as this is hanging over his head? Maybe not. So he's got to look at the situation if you're in his shoes or flip-flops and say, look, I got a wife, I got kids, and I got to make the deal that's best for me. And if that's the role they have carved out for him, well, maybe he feels that's the best move for him to make. Yeah, I know there were a lot of people very upset this week that Shinsuke Nakamura, he lost in 3 minutes on TV to Otis. It wasn't quite a squash, but it was close to it. A lot of people on social media very upset about that. I have long stopped since caring about how they position Nakamura on the main roster. They obviously only have him slotted now at a certain level. He came in, he won the Royal Rumble, he challenged for the WWE title at WrestleMania, had his big feud with AJ Styles. It's not as if they didn't program him in a prominent position at first. I think he even got a win on TV over John Cena. But, as is the case in WWE, not with everybody, but with a lot of people, after a while, they just kind of slot you in at a certain level. AJ Styles has largely been able to avoid that, but that doesn't necessarily work that way with everybody. And I look at Nakamura, and a lot of the stories that you hear about him are that he's content to be here in the States and not go back to Japan and not go back to New Japan, which I'm sure he could do if he wanted to, but he's content to be here because he loves it here, or his family loves it here, and he just loves to surf. So he goes to work, he probably gets paid well, he gets to surf. This guy is living the life. How old is Nakamura? Nakamura's got to be over 40 by now. And think of all the wars that he was in New Japan, and all the abuse, the physical abuse that he probably put his body through. Not probably. The abuse that he did, all those stiff matches, the style that he worked. I wouldn't be surprised if Nakamura looks at WWE as his pension plan. This is like his retirement. He doesn't care. He's living the life. If he's happy, great. He's living the life. He's probably making bank. He gets to surf. Why go back to getting the shit beaten out of him every night? So you know what? If that's the role they have for him, then so be it. It was nice while it lasted. But, you know, let's be honest here. I mean, he was also having matches that, frankly, were not overly impressive. I can't even put all that on WWE. Aside from maybe the initial match with Sami Zayn in NXT, which, being in the building that night, I mean, it felt like this guy is a big deal. That match had this electric feel in Dallas that night. And you really thought that, okay, they get it with this guy. They gave him the big fancy entrance, or at least Triple H did in NXT. He gets it. And they tried at first on the main roster, but, you got to put the blame partially on Nakamura. There were a lot of very uninspired matches that he had. And, if you fall out of favor with certain people and they end up not seeing you at a certain level, it's hard to break out of that. But I don't cry for the guy. If he's happy just surfing and whatever else it is that he does, then hey, enjoy your retirement. But I think there's money to be made with a guy like Matt Riddle who hasn't even reached his full potential yet. Now, is that WWE champion? Is that Universal champion? I think it could be one day, but it doesn't have to be. He doesn't have to be Roman Reigns. He doesn't have to be in the spot that Drew McIntyre is in to, be a big star that can make a lot of money. And, he could be the fun-loving guy, but you got to also make sure that you don't just turn him into a complete punchline. Which, I'm sorry, but that's what R-Truth has become. And I love R-Truth, but they had the opportunity to do some stuff with him too, and once the heel turn was over and the little Jimmy stuff started, that was it. He's been doing that act now for about 8 or 9 years. That ship has sailed with R-Truth. I don't want to see Riddle, end up in that spot. You could do more with him. There's more potential to do stuff with him. But that's the update. As far as his situation is concerned, it looks like he's probably not going anywhere. Ric Flair appeared on ESPN this week and claimed that WWE is in the process of building a physical Hall of Fame in Orlando. He said that it's been delayed due to COVID. He was on I don't know if it was a radio or a TV show, but he was on ESPN to talk about his golden robe. I guess he had a golden ring-worn robe, being the inspiration for NBA star Damian Lillard's new Adidas signature shoe that has either come out or is about to come out. He said WWE had purchased the robe and wants to showcase it in their Hall of Fame. Now, earlier this year, on one of the WWE shareholders' calls, the investor calls, Vince McMahon was asked about a physical Hall of Fame location, and this is what he said. He said, brick and mortar is something that, generally speaking, we are not necessarily fond of, but nonetheless, the interest in that continues to build, and it is still a possibility somewhere down the line. I think that WWF New York scared them off from doing, as he says, brick and mortar. I think it scared them off from doing stuff like that. That, and remember, they also bought a hotel. The old Debbie Reynolds Hotel. They were going to turn that into the WWE Hotel and Casino. I've talked about that on the podcast before. That never happened. That whole project never even got off the ground. Outside of a concept video. If you go on YouTube, you could probably find it. It's like this 3D concept video of what it was going to look like. And it never went anywhere. Although I think they sold the property and actually made a small profit on it. They may have made like $1 million or something on the property, so it ended up being a good deal for them. But again, all their big plans pretty much went up in smoke. They even had a WWE Niagara Falls up in Canada. which was a store. I think they just licensed the WWE name out for it. But that closed down a number of years as well. A number of years ago. But I've always said the only way to make this work was to open something in a tourist destination. And Orlando is a tourist destination. You've got Disney World, you've got Universal Studios, maybe even open something up at Universal if they were interested, in working with WWE. Otherwise, I cannot imagine that this would do enough foot traffic to warrant whatever they would have to pay for rent and maintenance. Unless you're a wrestling fan, why would you care? Who would go to the WWE Hall of Fame? Are you going to really get enough of those people to justify the operations of the building? You'd have to be a WWE fan or just a wrestling diehard, I think, to probably make something like that work. I mean, I'm a wrestling fan, so I care. I would totally visit if they ever opened up a physical Hall of Fame. Many years ago, at the NBC store in Times Square, not Times Square, but Rockefeller Center, they briefly, it was only for maybe a month maybe, when WWE moved back to USA, they were back in business with NBC Universal, they opened up what was basically like a small Hall of Fame. It was the second or third floor of the NBC store. I still have the pictures I took. And they had a whole bunch of different artifacts in these glass cases. They had the contract for the Hulk Hogan-Vince McMahon match at WrestleMania 19 with Hogan's blood smeared on it and old memorabilia and cardboard cutouts and stuff. And that was just like a little section. And I was in like wrestling heaven. I remember walking over there on my lunch break during my lunch break from work. Now imagine a gigantic Hall of Fame. We've seen glimpses of what would be in it because every year they go on the road for WrestleMania, fan access. They have all kinds of memorabilia and artifacts and stuff. And, if you're a fan, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool stuff. Now, WWE has not commented on this publicly, so either Flair spilled the beans when he wasn't supposed to, or, and I think this may be more likely, they bought the robe from Flair for a possible Hall of Fame, right? That's what Flair said. They bought the robe. That's why he made the comment he did. And I think Flair maybe is just assuming that they're opening something up soon. Like when the whole COVID thing is over, there's going to be, an announcement made imminently on a Hall of Fame. In reality, though, they may not be any closer now to opening something up than they were before. It could just be the fact that they bought the robe from him. Their end goal is to open a Hall of Fame, but we've heard that for years. That doesn't make things any different. We've known that already. And either way now with COVID, it's going to be a long time before we get a physical WWE Hall of Fame.